Hi, and welcome to the Halfie Project Podcast.
Hey.
I
Hello.
am Becky. Wow, you guys jumped in right away. I had a nice
Yes.
intro
Coming in hot.
We
set
are
up
ready.
and everything.
We are ready.
My goodness. Well, okay, you guys probably guessed. We do have in the studio here, it's me, Becky, and then Jay right
Hello,
there.
how are you doing? I have a cough, so I might be coughing obnoxiously a lot, so please excuse that.
Giving a heads up to all of you guys, okay? And as you may already be aware, but in case you're joining in for the first time and you've never watched any of our videos on the Halfie Project YouTube channel or listened to our podcast, well, here on the podcast, we talk about not only the half Korean experience, but we also discuss culture, being second generation or adopted, social aspects of racial differences, and what it looks like to live as a mixed culture person. And we often have a guest with us to chat about all these things and share their own stories. And today, we have just that special guest, someone joining us in the studio. You may have heard his dulcet tones somewhere on the radio, in a commercial, or voiceover online. This is videographer, fellow half Korean, and my friend, Alexander Isaac.
Hey, Becky.
Alex, welcome to the
What a
podcast.
what a nice introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you very
yeah,
much.
I'm just warming you up, just flattery. That's all it is.
Buttering me up.
Nice.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you here.
Yeah, thank you. I know we've been talking about this for a long time to come, and I'm really glad to finally be on the other side. Before I did with Cedric, I was doing the video work
That's
for you guys.
right,
So
yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, you shot the Cedric interview.
yeah.
Okay, it turned out
Yeah.
really nice.
Thank
thank
you.
you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that did get a really great response. That's right. I should have mentioned that. Good point. That video was really nice.
Way to go, Becky.
Yeah, I prepared for this. But Jay, you said that you have a cold. How
I
come
do.
it doesn't go away?
I don't know. I ask myself that every year. I get like a bad cold every year,
Yeah.
and then after the cold goes away, I get this cough that lingers a lot.
Uh-huh.
I've been to a couple doctors, and they don't seem too concerned. They just give me like really heavy cough medication most of the time, and then it goes away after like a month or so.
It means spring is here.
Yeah,
That's what it
yeah,
means.
it's a good sign.
Oh,
yeah.
sure. Yeah, it's just heralding the changing weather.
Yeah.
It's a divine sign.
Starting to get those allergies too.
Yeah,
Sucks.
maybe, yeah, for sure.
This is funny because both of you guys have really like low bass kind of voices. And
Do
so
I?
I'm hearing
I
it
didn't
in
even
my
know, yeah.
earphones really powerfully right now.
I'm just trying to sound manly, you know, compensating for other areas. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
You do a little bit of voice acting. Just really, hey, Becky.
Yeah.
How you doing?
It is true, though. Actually, Alex and I, what I was going to tell you earlier, Jay, Alex and I met in the studio for a voice acting gig. And it was funny because I remember the first time I saw you. I think you were in the studio first already, right? You were seated.
I think so, yeah.
And I came in and I thought, oh, this is a half Korean. This is a halfie. And I waited to the end of the shoot or like to the end of the recording to
Questionable.
ask
She was
you.
staring at me the whole time. Like,
I don't doubt it. Like, I feel like.
she was basically thinking, I'm going to interview you one day.
Yeah, for sure.
How did you know? You read my mind. Yeah, well, it's really great that you are actually here because it's been years since that first meeting and I've always appreciated your friendship throughout all of this time. Well, Alex, first, even though I already gave you a bit of an introduction, do you mind just telling us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Alexander Isaac. I came to Korea 6 years ago now. I initially came as an English teacher.
Okay.
I was living out in Gangwon-do in Chuncheon.
Okay.
I just wanted to basically just learn Korean because my mother's Korean. I studied Korean language for 4 years in college because I wanted to learn it.
Nice.
So I was good at writing and reading, but I wasn't really good at speaking. So I
Okay.
wanted to spend 1 year in Korea just perfecting language. And then after 1 year of just, out in the suburbs, just kind of came.
Right.
I was the only one speaking English. Teachers were just afraid of me. So I just had
A
to...
foreigner in our
Right?
midst, like, stay away.
So it really put me out of my comfort zone to just really speak Korean.
Right.
And then I moved to Seoul after that. And since then, just been doing voice work and doing videography.
That was something that actually stood out to me when we first met. Jay, if you need to cough, it's okay. Just cough whenever you need to.
Yeah, I'm just like
I see
trembling in the background, trying not to cough, and it's like really difficult.
Yeah, no, the first time I recall that you were speaking in Korean at that first recording, and I had never met other half Koreans who
Really?
spoke Korean that well at that point. Like
okay.
I spoke Korean to a certain extent, and then I rarely met anyone who was speaking as well as you had. So that was another thing that struck me.
Hopefully better now.
Yeah, we would hope so.
That
I
was
feel
like
sometimes
almost
my
3 years ago, right?
language skills don't improve.
Oh, I feel that every day.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're doing this in English because I feel like my English is going down.
Yeah, that happens.
Really?
Yeah, it's like
You
I
need to
came here
practice your
to
English too.
Yeah.
right. I came here to learn Korean too, and then
Oh,
like I
really?
catch my Korean skills not improving,
Mhm.
and then I don't use English as much. So I feel like I have the diction of a 6th grader. You know what I mean?
You can't
Right.
speak either.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
There's
tough
definitely
life.
that phase.
There
For
we go.
sure.
It's both going down. Greg, you're going to have to help us out with that. By the way, we have another friend in the studio. Greg's hanging out in the corner. You probably will see him on the video at some point. Hey.
Sitting
There
very
he is.
uncomfortably.
Feel free to sit comfortably,
Yeah.
Greg. Yeah, just settle in. But as Alex already said, so he's half Korean. You're half Korean and half Egyptian.
Egyptian,
Your dad's
yeah.
Egyptian. I met him at the wedding. We'll get to that point.
Yes.
But before, Jay, when you first saw Alex, did you think he was half Korean?
Well, okay, so yeah, I saw him for the first time today, and no, I did not think you were half Korean.
But he was probably like, why is he here then?
Well, I just saw
Why
like
on the
your hand
podcast?
like through the door, and I was like, oh, that's probably Alex. And then you came in, and I was like, oh, didn't look like what I expected for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I myself have never seen half Korean, half Egyptian before you and your sisters. So I guess I didn't even know what to expect.
Yeah. It's obviously not very common.
Mm-hmm.
But growing up in New York, you see a lot of mixes.
Mm-mm.
So I didn't meet them directly, but I knew some people who had friends who were actually Korean Egyptian as well.
Mhm.
Right.
But in my friends groups, like some Israeli and Indian
Yeah.
couples,
Yeah.
and then like my best friend, he was Indian Jewish, so Spanish and Korean. There was many different mixes. So it was
Sure. Of course. Yeah. New York City.
New York, yeah.
Right. Of course. That's where so many cultures are all together. Do most people guess that you're half Korean? This is a different. Let's say in Korea. How about?
In Korean, no, not at all, not at all. But it's really weird. Like to Koreans, I don't look Asian at all.
Mm-hmm.
But to foreigners, like they're like, okay, what Asian are you?
What Asian are you?
Okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
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 Yeah, I guess so. I
Do you
mean,
have like a lot of? Okay, so I have a friend who's half Hispanic, and then like the other half is just like a whole mixture of races. So he gets called like, or people see him as like Egyptian or half black or like just any other slew of ethnicities. Do you have like a common ethnicity that people always think you are? Or is it just super random?
For sure.
Yeah.
People ask me if I'm Filipino.
Okay.
If I'm like, they'll say half of things because they know I'm mixed.
Okay.
So are you half Indian?
Yeah.
Are you half Spanish? I got something really interesting a couple of years ago in Haebangchon.
Yeah.
Someone just came up to me and started speaking Turkish, and I was like, no, I don't speak Turkish. And they're just like, why not? They're like, you're from Turkey. I'm like,
You're
"No,
right, I am. How did you know?
I'm sorry.
But so you speak Korean very fluently, though. Now you do.
I do now.
Mhm.
Yeah, I do now.
How are people's reactions when
It's really funny.
when you're speaking Korean? Because honestly, like Jay, I don't think you've heard Alex speak
I heard a
Korean.
little bit of it, and yeah,
A
it
little
sounded
bit.
really good.
Yeah, it's so nice. And often, I know, at least in my case, like when I speak in Korean, most of the time for the first couple minutes, like most Koreans will think, oh, she's just Korean, right? But I'm
Must
wondering,
be nice. I never get that. People are like, what is this guy?
in your case, Alex, what's it like for you? Do people react differently? Do you get, usually get,
It varies.
Yeah.
It's definitely different for each person. The most common or the most frequent case is, when you're in a taxi, obviously, and then you tell the person like, 연남동으로 가주세요, and then they're just like
Double
give
take.
you that
looking
side
back.
look.
They look back and they're like, I thought I just saw a foreigner walking this car, and then starts the conversation. Where are you from?
right.
Why do you speak Korean? How long have you been here? And so that situation is always fun. But then the other situation is like, if I say, yes, my mom's Korean, then they're like, oh, okay. Well, your Korean's not that good then.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait,
Really?
I try.
Oh, that's kind of
Dang,
funny.
That's shady.
Yeah.
It's like they give you the double standard of like,
Sure.
if you're Korean, then your Korean should be, perfect. And
Oh,
that's
okay.
that's kind of the case with a lot of Korean Americans.
For sure.
They don't take into the consideration that your first language may be English,
Right.
and that you have to put in a lot of effort to learn the language. It's not just,
It's not something
secondhand.
you just like get in through osmosis.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, there's the advantage when your parents speak Korean around the home. But like you said, speaking came last for you, right?
Yeah.
And so that definitely takes practice and time. It's funny because it's my mom who's always telling me that. Like, she's like, I think your English is bad now and also your Korean. I'm like, Mom, I'm trying. But speaking of parents, let's take it back a little bit. So your dad, is he first gen Egyptian?
Yeah, first generation born and raised in Cairo.
Cool.
But he left Cairo when he was in his late teens.
Mm-hmm.
And then he left to Italy. And he was living there for about 8-9 years. And then he moved to London. And then from there he moved to New York City.
Wow.
Initially he left Egypt because they had a military conscription. So he didn't want to go to the army.
Mm-hmm.
So he left.
He's a peace out. I'm
Yeah,
not doing this.
he had a fake passport and went out of the country.
Oh my goodness.
Wow, that's how you do it. Yeah.
I mean, he's a U.S. citizen now, so
Right.
Yeah.
He
Whatever.
upgraded, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fake passport to U.S. citizenship.
yeah.
That's
And
cool.
my mom is first generation from Seoul as
Mhm.
well. So she moved in her mid-20s. So she's been living in New York for almost 40 years now.
But still, like at a significantly
Mhm.
older age, they left their respective home countries, right? So they would still
Yeah.
maintain this sense of originally, like, this is my home country. Do your parents feel that way, or do they feel now like, okay, New York City is where we live and we are Americans?
Well, I
Have you
think
asked
it's a little bit different because in most cases that I see of people immigrating to another country, they do it with their kids.
Mm-hmm.
So that if their kids are born there, then, you know, they are the first generation, you know, Americans. But in our case, with my parents, they moved there in their 20s and they didn't get married until their 30s.
Mm.
So they kind of had this growing up phase in another country.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you guys, but for me, like, my growing up phase or like my career building phase, and those years all were in Korea. So I feel like I know Korea a lot better than I know New York,
Mm-mm.
just because, you know, doing all these odd jobs, making money, trying to make connections, all that was here.
Mm-hmm.
So I just feel like I know it better. And I definitely think my parents, or I know my parents, they know New York City way better than, you know, Egypt or Korea.
Mm-mm. You know, I can really agree
Mm.
with you on that aspect. Yeah, because I spend most of my career, I would say majority, almost all
Right.
of my career here. My career here in Korea.
Career.
Right? Building my career here, and then my networks
Mhm.
and all of that, and understanding the culture and the business aspect. So yeah, I imagine that some of that would also be reflective in your parents and their life in New York City. How did they end up meeting? May I ask?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like those classic New York City love stories.
Oh, okay.
I love it.
Yeah.
My dad was a chef at an Italian restaurant.
Okay,
and,
yeah, this is like a movie already or something.
and my mom was a waitress at a Korean restaurant.
Okay.
And my dad was curious about Korean food because, you know, him being a chef, he wanted to learn about other types of food. So he'd go in there, and then he met her. She was a waitress, and he just kept asking her, like, you know, how do you make this or how do you make that or what this food is about. And, you know, she's like, I'm the waitress, I'm not a cook.
Stop asking me these questions.
And then he's like, you know, I'll make you some Italian food. And she's like, all right. And then, you know, that's how it started.
Wow,
Food, of
that
course.
sounds like out of
It's
a
so
movie.
romantic.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
a drama or something.
Seriously.
A meet cute or whatever.
Well, did both of your parents speak English well at that time?
Well, they're both, you know, their first language was Korean and Arabic respectively.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure it's the language of love, right? I really don't know, but yeah, they're good now.
Yeah.
So
It's
it
interesting.
must have worked out.
I mean, because my parents too, they didn't speak a mutual language. My
Really?
mom only spoke Korean. My dad only spoke
wow.
English. So when they first met, I have no idea.
How do you grow close to someone without knowing their language? I'm curious because it's hard to
Yeah.
grow close to people even if you do know the same language.
Right,
Sometimes
right.
you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
But if you don't know the language, like I don't know, what do you do? Like,
I mean, this is a good topic
Yeah.
for probably another couple.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Find a couple that doesn't speak the same
Right,
language.
right.
We
You know,
could have-
actually, my wife thought that she was going to learn English when we started dating.
Yeah.
And little did she know, I was just learning Korean by myself. Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, she was like, oh, okay, yes, I'm dating this foreigner. We're going to,
Yeah.
I'm going to help him learn Korean. He's going to help me learn English. And then the funny thing was like I was happy to do like that kind of let's do one day speaking Korean, one day speaking English, that kind of thing that a lot of couples do. But whenever it was a day for English, she'd just be like, 너무 답답해. Like I'm so frustrated. I just wanted to speak like fast and in my own style, my own personality. So she's just like, forget it.
I can understand that. It feels so frustrating not being able to express yourself. I feel like I sound like an idiot when I speak Korean, and you just have this feeling of like,
frustration.
I need to break out of this cage.
Yeah. It's worse when like I know I can say it. I know the words, but it's just not coming to me right now in this moment when I need it. That's the most frustrating part.
Yeah, and especially when you fight.
Oh, yeah.
That's when I'm just like, all right, let's speak English for a little bit.
Yeah, well, I can't even imagine how they would have communicated. I should probably ask
that's a good
my mom
question.
and dad about that. And I would be really interested to hear what your parents have to say, too. I saw your parents. I met them very briefly at your wedding.
Yes.
Which was a couple of months ago.
And congrats.
Wow. Already 6 months.
Wow, half a year.
That's crazy.
That is crazy. Yeah. But I remember distinctly being surprised when I saw your parents.
Why?
Because I felt they were so quintessentially Korean and Egyptian. Like that, it just hit me right in the eyes. That's what I saw. Just the way your dad's expression was, and then your mom.
He's just like cool and collected and outside smoking a cigarette in his 3-piece suit, just like
for real,
like a gang. He's an OG or something.
Really, you should see a photo of him. And my mom was in a hanbok.
She was wearing hanbok, so even
awesome.
more. It was a very powerful image.
Yeah,
and I saw them sitting at the table right away. I was like, that's Alex's parents. I know that. But growing up, did you have unusual aspects in your home? I'm sure you had plenty, but anything now when you look in retrospect, you're like, okay, yeah, this was a very unique upbringing. Is there anything that comes to mind?
I wouldn't say necessarily like different for an upbringing, but I didn't really know what being Korean meant, and because when my parents separated back in middle school, I was living with my mom, and then we'd eat Korean food at home. So when people like my friends would ask me like, oh, what'd you do yesterday? What'd you have for dinner? Or what'd you eat? And then I say like, kimchi 볶음밥 or something like that. And they're just like, what is that? I'm like, oh, like we're Korean, so we eat this food. And if you're Italian, then you eat Italian food. And if you're Egyptian, then you eat Egyptian food. Like that's what I thought ethnicity was.
Yeah.
Just like different foods that you eat. Not necessarily culture or, this and that, because we didn't really have any traditions or language that we spoke at home, besides my mom screaming at us to like wake up.
Yeah. Or to eat.
Yeah, I mean, so does that really answer your question?
I mean, it's funny because to me also, when I hear this, to me that just sounds like the most ordinary upbringing, right? Even though in the U.S., I grew up in the U.S., but for me as well, like this is what I'm accustomed to, my mom shouting at us in Korean and eating Korean food at home. And then when I was older, people would be like, oh, what are you eating? Like, what's in your lunchbox? I'm like, what? This is kimbap. Like, this is what everybody eats, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Now then, you're here in Korea pretty much fully immersed, and you said you were only coming for 1 year. It's been 6, sir. What was that change? What made you want to come to Korea? And did you want to learn more about what it meant to be Korean or Korean culture? What was that initial draw?
Well, the initial draw, like I mentioned, was just the language. I started watching Korean television at the end of high school, which led me to say like, okay, let me take a shot at actually learning this language. So when I was learning Korean, I was like, practicing it and studying it while watching Korean television. And then I was like, all right, now I need to learn how to speak, so let's go to Korea. So that was the initial push that, got me here.
Yeah. But it's still, I think, like, I guess there's something culturally, I suppose, with something about the Korean culture, because you've got 2 sisters, and I don't think either of them speak Korean, do they?
No, not really.
Yeah, and they've never lived in Korea either.
No.
And I remember meeting your sisters, hanging out with them for a short time, and I felt like, okay, Alex, just like me and my 2 sisters, my 3 sisters, 2 sisters. There's 3 of us total. Sorry, guys. I have 2 sisters, and then there's me, and I'm the only one who speaks Korean fluently, and I'm the only one who ventured out here and has lived here. And so when I saw also your siblings, and I recognized your case was very similar to mine, I started wondering then, okay, why did Alex choose to come to Korea? What was that reason?
I don't know. I don't think my older sister and younger sister really had that experience that I did, where I was like, okay, I'm sick and tired of people saying you're Korean, but you don't speak Korean.
So you got that a lot when you were younger?
Yeah,
okay.
because growing up in Flushing, New York, tons and tons of Koreans.
Okay.
Not that they spoke Korean, but there were tons of Koreans, and my friends were Korean American. I went to a Korean American church, and they're just, I was surrounded by a lot of Koreans, but people would ask me like, so, what are you? And I'd say, half Korean, half Egyptian. They'd say, oh, you're Korean. Do you speak Korean? No. So that really kind of bothered me.
Right.
It took, almost 20 years to bother me, but, but it did bother me, and that's kind of what pushed me in that direction. Unfortunately, I never got that about Arabic, so I don't speak any Arabic.
Yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Yeah. So you talked a lot about, your experience with Korean culture growing up as a young child, but what about your Egyptian side? So, do you identify with it or feel a draw to that particular?
Not in the same way as, Korea or Korean language did, but the biggest factor why I identify more with Korean than Egyptian is because growing up with my mom, that was really, big for me. The community that I was living in, Flushing, was all Korean American. The only relation that I had to Egyptian culture was on whenever I see my dad and he'd make Egyptian food, or on holidays when we go visit our Egyptian side of the family, and we have a big family. So just seeing them was like Egyptian culture to me. But it was obviously Egyptian culture because we're eating Egyptian food, everyone's speaking Arabic, but it was never like, wow, I want to, learn Arabic. It was just like, oh, this is my family. So. Yeah.
So you had that sense of familiarity, but at the same time, there's obviously a kind of distance. So when people ask you, okay, what are you, right? What is most likely what you were to initially say in response?
Well, since I hear that in Korea, I say half Korean, and then I'll wait for them to ask me what's the other half.
Right.
But I think it's kind of interesting that I say that instead of saying, I'm American or I'm a New Yorker or something like that. I guess I kind of identify as half Korean now.
Yeah.
Do you feel the same way?
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally, it just struck me right as you were saying at this moment that, to be honest, when people ask me, oh, what are you? I always say, oh, I'm half Korean. And and there, of course, is always the follow-up question, oh, what's the other half? But yeah, you would think that we would most likely say, like, I'm from New York, I'm from America. But in my case, I grew up military, so I don't really identify with like one strong place or city.
I find it really interesting that you just start off with I'm half Korean and then you wait for the other people to ask you. Is it because you just like, I'm kind of curious, is there a reason for that?
Well, I'm also kind of assuming that they already think that I'm, Asian or Korean.
Right.
So I'm just like reaffirming that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it is partly that. And also, I feel like in a way, maybe it became a habit, but in a way it kind of can make our association closer, right? I'm not a stranger. I'm not a total foreigner. I'm part of you. You can feel comfortable with me. I think maybe a subliminal message, if you want to say, like some subconscious way to have chong, right? This connection. Maybe that's it. Yeah.
I think also if I start off by saying half Egyptian, then it already like goes out the window that I'm part Korean to them, or they're just like already think of me as a foreigner. So yeah, just kind of reaffirming to them, reconfirming that I'm Korean.
Yeah.
Establishing like that kinship or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that's what it is.
Except when it's not in my favor. Though. I'm American.
And you pull the foreigner card.
Yeah.
A couple of 회식s where I've done
Usually
that.
with work, it's like, yes,
Yeah.
I'm American.
Yeah, well, that's actually, speaking of work.
I do that all the time too, actually.
You do too, Jay?
Yeah, of course. Just
are you able to get out
I'm a
of it?
Kyopo, so like, sorry.
You
like,
must get that all the time, though.
You
You must get that all the time. They're just like, oh, we do things this way. And
all the time. All the time. But, it's just like, oh, yeah, I pretend sometimes because I can understand a lot more sometimes than people think I do. But then I'll just kind of play dumb a little bit so I could, kind of pick and choose my spots. If I want to impress someone, I'll bust out my knowledge. And then if I want to just slide out of something, I'll just be like, oh, yeah, I got to go. Like, I got stuff to do. So, yeah, it comes in handy sometimes.
in a way, it's kind of, I mean, it's a benefit and a burden, right? Because in the sense, let's say burden, I don't know if burden is the correct word, but in a way it does alienate you. Like you'll never be fully part of the culture and the community. That's one sense.
Yeah.
But then the benefit is also you are able to get out of these like responsibilities, you know, that Korean people have to bear. So is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I'm not really sure, but I've definitely felt the advantages and the disadvantages of that.
Yeah, I mean, the word 외국인 is just like outsider.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
you're not one of
it's
us.
very excluding, right? So sometimes when you have to admit that, like, yes, I'm an outsider, it's just language is a funny thing like that can separate.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'll ever. Well, some people, you know, nowadays, especially if you speak good Korean and you eat a certain way, or they'll say, you know, 한국 사람 다 됐다. But
Sure.
it's just kind of like just a phrase.
It's almost patronizing,
A little
I'll be
bit.
honest. Yeah. I'll hear that a lot. I think probably the foremost thing I hear all the time is like, oh, your Korean is so good. And it's like, oh, wow, Becky, she's like Korean. Right. It feels very patronizing, to be honest. Do you guys get those phrases? Do you hear that often?
I never hear my Korean so good, so I don't know what that feels like.
Yeah, but I'm no. I think in my case as well, because to some people, I look very Korean, right? So
I think on some days.
on some days,
Yeah, Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
on other days, I definitely look like an outsider, an alien, right? Monday, Wednesday, Friday is what she said. Yeah, so it just depends on the situation. But for myself, and I'm wondering for you, Alex, for myself, I've never felt 100% accepted or embraced by the Korean community. And I don't know if you saw the interview we had with Daniel. He's half Korean, half German. And this was a question that he had. At the end of the interview, he said, what I'm really curious to know through Halfie Project, are you ever going to meet any Halfies who feel totally accepted and they feel like they belong in the Korean community? He says, I really want to know, does that person exist? So may I ask that question to you? Have you ever felt fully embraced and accepted by the Korean community?
I think that's a very loaded question. First of all, I think the only way to be fully accepted is if you do something really great. So, for example, you know, Heinz Ward, he's half Korean, half black, was MVP of the Super Bowl.
Oh, right, yeah.
Korean community absolutely loved him. They were like, "You're Korean," right?
Right.
But if that didn't happen, they would have been like, "Oh, you're half Korean, you're a foreigner, you're an outsider." I'm not saying that's going to happen all the time, and it doesn't exactly happen to me, but I don't think that I feel 100% part of the community. But if there are things, or for a good example is if I'm with friends, then they're like, "Oh, you know, we have this half Korean friend, you know, come talk to him." It can be including in a different way. When I was working for a company, it was kind of like this double-edged half Korean. It was like, we have a foreigner in our company. You know, look at our foreigner.
The token foreigner.
Yeah, we're international. But at the same time, they're like, "Oh no, don't worry, he speaks Korean. He's half Korean."
Yeah.
Right?
Don't be too scared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it goes back and forth. I don't want to sound too cheesy, but I think like the main area that I feel welcome as a Korean is like, you know, through Unu.
Now, Unu, for you guys who don't know, that's Alex's wife. And I met you when you were dating her.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys were. How long did you guys date before you got married?
4 years.
Wait, you dated for 4 years?
Yeah, we
Okay.
dated for 4 years,
Okay.
but we were engaged the last year.
Okay.
Yes, so last October.
How'd
Yeah.
you guys meet?
Kind of a funny story because I was living in Chuncheon and I wanted to, move to Seoul because I'm a big city guy and
New York. Yeah.
yeah, and I wanted to live in Seoul, so I was like, what can I do in Seoul? And I was like, whatever, I'm just gonna go. But I was telling my mom about this, and being the worried mom, she was like scavenging the internet for jobs, and she's like, "Oh, there's this job in Incheon, go do it and go sign up, and if you get it, then just do it." So I was like, I don't really want to do that, but I've got nothing else going on, so I'll just apply, and then I happened to get it, and it was for the Asian Games
Okay.
out in
Oh,
Incheon
nice.
in 2014.
Yeah.
Nice.
So they needed English reporters for this, for sports. And Unu was our group's leader.
Okay.
So that's how we met.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we were out in Incheon interviewing athletes and stuff.
That's really nice. And then you guys started dating pretty much soon after that?
Yeah, we were friends for about 4 or 5 months
Mhm.
and then started dating from there.
Yeah. Jay, it would be really cool if you met her. She's a really cool girl.
Yeah, she's changed her entire career. She was doing 2 years in broadcast and like journalism.
Yeah.
And then she switched totally to interior design. So
That's quite the shift. How'd that come about? Just
Um,
curious.
Well, in journalism, you have to spend every single day looking for a story.
Okay.
And that was kind of exhausting. For interior design, it's you have this one goal that
Right.
this one project, and you see progression every single day towards the end of the goal. It's kind of like cleaning your room. You start off with one thing, 2 things, and then it gets cleaner and cleaner.
Right.
So for interior design at a construction site, you see things slowly coming together.
Mm-mm.
You see your own progression. You see like your own how do you call it? Like your own your own progression like of your skill.
Mm-mm.
So she really found that to be more satisfying.
So I know you can't speak for her, but this is kind of based off a conversation she and I had like, I want to say a year or 2 years ago. She was wondering about your guys' future because she knew as a Korean-speaking reporter, it would be very difficult for her to find a broadcast job, say if you guys ended up moving to the U.S. Do you think her change in career, and of course, I'm not saying you can speak for her at all, but just wondering if you guys ever mentioned this. Do you think a reason for this huge shift in her career was maybe in anticipation or preparation for that possibility?
I wouldn't say in preparation, but that was definitely a huge factor. When she was a journalist, it was for the Korean language. So at first, I was saying to her, like, why don't you switch to a company that does English news in Korea? That way, in the event that we need to move, or in the event that, we want to move for, the future, then you're able to, and you have this skill. So initially that didn't happen. But when she moved careers, she was definitely calculating like, I need a skill. I need a skill that can work anywhere, not based on language, not based on the culture. So
yeah, so that was part of the
definitely,
choice.
definitely.
So are you guys entertaining the thought of leaving Seoul anytime soon, or?
I really don't think so. I mean, I think once kids come into the picture, then maybe. But we really like Korea.
Yeah.
Like Seoul. Just the air, man.
Yeah, man. You don't yearn for New York City every once in a while?
I really don't.
Oh, wow.
I know so many people that want to get out of New York, actually.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, think about it. Like, I have a friend, she makes 6 figures in New York.
Yeah.
But can't save money.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
I don't make 6 figures.
Right.
Yeah.
But I can save money.
Right.
Yeah.
That is insane, like how cost of living has skyrocketed that high.
Yeah. Well, tell her to come on over here. I know a nice 부동산
Right.
in my neighborhood.
I've been trying to convince my family to move here.
Really? To that extent?
I just love Korea so much that I wish they were here experiencing it with us, especially if we have kids soon. So
yeah, that's this is something that's always very difficult with families that are in different countries. Especially when it comes to kids. I know so many people who really. Again, like, I don't know if you would call this a negative aspect. There's so many blessings to a mixed culture marriage, but for sure, having the separation of families, and this was something in my family that was a constant heartache to my mom, like seeing her cry almost like a weekly basis because of the separation of family. And so when you consider having kids, is this something that you guys take into consideration? Do you even think about that? And if you do, how do you anticipate handling that?
Oh man, it's such a hard thing to ask.
Yeah.
I can't say that we thought that far into the future when we were, getting engaged, but we definitely were under the assumption that we'd be living in Korea at first and leaving the options open in the future. when it comes to kids, like, I think it's the most important thing is education, and the
Spoken like a true Korean.
But I was also gonna say, like, the 환경, like the environment that they grew up in. So that might not be Korea.
That can be true.
Yeah, so just keeping it open. But I think for the education problem in Korea, I mean, it's a whole other subject. But just briefly, that I think it also really depends on the parents. So if we are very open, we're very relaxed and just accepting of how our future kids could learn, then I don't think it'd be a problem to be here either. Yeah, so I think it is a factor, but I'd rather have my parents come here than us go there, to be honest.
Do you think they would come? Maybe.
I think my mom would get on a plane right away.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, for the kids.
And my dad, he just wants to start a business in Korea, so he's waiting for me to save money, and I'm like, keep dreaming.
But regardless, there's still possibility, that your family could come, which is actually such a nice thought to entertain, to be honest.
I mean, like you were mentioning, just the heartache of having family separated like that, and my family, I'll admit it myself first, very emotional. Everyone's like, we love so much that we get hurt very easily from each other. It's like kind of the opposite of Unu's family in some respects, where if you don't call or text for a couple of days, it doesn't mean that, you're mad or anything. And then if I don't do that to my dad, he'd be like, are you okay? Something wrong? You don't miss me. You don't love me. I'm like, relax.
Is that a cultural thing or just a personal, familial thing?
I think it's both. Definitely both. But for our family, I think there's just a lot of love and a lot of expectation. So, I mean... Yeah.
How does your family get on with Unu's family?
Well, it's interesting because my mom came here for 상견례, like the initial meeting between the parents, but it was just her alone. It was just her alone. So when she got to meet Unu's mom and Unu's dad separately, because they're also separated, they got along very well, but just very opposite in characteristics. So Unu's mom is very like logical and unemotional, and my mom is like, oh, what are we gonna do, where are they gonna live, how much money do they have, this and this and this, and they're just like, and his mom's like, they'll figure it out. So it was interesting to see, and the rest of my family got to meet Unu's family like the week of the wedding. So that was a whirlwind of meet and greets, emotions, and food. Lots of food.
Lots of good food.
Yeah.
I mean, weddings are hard enough as it is. And then you're including international travel and people meeting for the first time. I'm sure that was I don't
even want to think about that.
Half of a nightmare.
Yeah, I don't know, like marriages not marriages, but weddings. They both look like they could be a blast, and then just like take a huge mental toll. You know what I mean? There's so much stress and expectations.
God, I never have to get married again.
He took these 6 months just to relax.
Yeah, decompress.
Yeah. Oh man, it's just so much miscommunication when people are overseas and
that's true.
Planning and where they're gonna stay, where they're gonna eat, how they're gonna move. They don't speak Korean. We're in Korea. Time difference. It's just a long list.
It's funny, Alex. You're saying this as if that's a one-time thing. This is your life now. Like, you're gonna be living this.
Yeah, but at least it wasn't for one big event.
Yeah.
The rest, we do plan. Like, we have a situation or an understanding with our family that every year and a half we go to New York or wherever they are. And then on the other year and a half, or the odd half of the year, does that make sense? On the other, that half of the year that is not part of that year and a half? Yes.
So is this a 2-year time frame? Or?
Well, if you do it like...
I don't math pretty well, so...
okay, how do you do this? So, for example, this December, we're going to New York.
Yeah.
And then the next year, in the summer, they should be coming to Korea.
Okay.
So that way we have like...
Just pretend you understand.
Yeah, I'm just going to shake my head.
Yeah.
just know that there's a constant back and forth of seeing each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you actually need to plan that.
Mm-mm.
Otherwise, you just say like, yes, I'll come when I have time. And then that turns into years.
Yeah.
That's
And
really
then-
cool that you do that because I have a lot of family that lives in Virginia, and there are like 5 or 6 year stretches where I just don't see them at all.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you're just like, oh, yeah, I'll see him one day.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it just turns into 2 or 3 or 4
Right.
or 5, 6 years. And then, so that's really cool that you do end up doing that.
Yeah.
You know, this complicated time structure that you do have.
I mean, but I'm sure you guys' families can understand this as well. But you know, a lot of my family hadn't seen each other, who are stateside, until it was a family event like a wedding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because they don't just hang out with each other. They don't see each other even in the holidays. It's just with their own families.
Right.
So just planning for that is really important.
Yeah, I think especially, I mean, it's really important, and it's so easy to forget that, and just to chalk it up to time differences, and I don't have money, but if it's significant enough, like, you're going to make that happen. And for myself, I'm not married, but I think, no matter who I marry, I want to keep in mind, like, how important family is, because I've just seen the separation within my own family my whole life, and you would never want that for yourself or a future spouse or your kids or future family, that kind of thing. So it's really cool that you're doing that, Alex. I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, we just need to stick to it. I mean, you just like literally need to set aside money each month and remind each other that we're still meeting.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people just forget and live their lives,
Yeah.
Yeah, on the topic of marriage, though, I was kind of curious, like, you were saying that when you and Unu first met, you guys were initially going to do like language exchanges and stuff, and you were going to teach her English and she was going to teach you Korean. How has it been like dating someone like while learning the language, especially a language that's really difficult to pick up and you can't just really pick it up naturally because it's so different than English?
Well, with like all languages, if you have a spouse or you have someone that you're dating, that's almost the fastest way to learn. Especially when you have instant messaging like Kakao and you just talk all day and you call at night.
Right.
So it's just constantly working on the language. But, Becky knows Unu speaks good English. She spent some time abroad, but it's just not her first language, so she just doesn't want to use it.
For sure.
She understands everything really well. We attended English-speaking church. But it definitely was challenging those first years when my Korean language wasn't as good as it is now, and she always reminded me of that. I mean, being a journalist in Korea, you need to have like a certification for Korean language.
Yeah.
Right.
You need to be certified as a Korean speaker.
Yeah.
So she knew every single mistake that I was saying.
Oh, man. No slack.
Yeah.
That's interesting you say that because my parents speak pretty fluently, or they speak fluently like it's their first language, but they moved over to the States when they're pretty young.
Yeah.
So when they speak together, they always speak Korean. But I was just complaining to my parents about how hard Korean is, and my dad was like, yeah, I mean, I watch the news sometimes, and I can't pick up certain words because I just never heard that before.
Yeah.
So yeah, I imagine you must get a lot of slack or get a lot of nitpicking.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like interesting that you say about news because in news they use Hanja Chinese characters. They use a lot of words that are so formal that no one really knows what they mean except for in the news circles.
Right.
So it's like regular people like me can't even understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sorry, go ahead.
Oh no. Oh yeah, I was just gonna ask. So like so. Not knowing the language or whatever, I'm sure that was pretty frustrating, or not being super fluent. But when you guys first started dating, but like, were there any like cultural differences or something like that was really hard to wrap your head around when you first started dating? Because I feel like that's a common issue that comes up. Just like little things that you think are normal, being raised in a certain culture or New York culture or American culture, and then certain things that you think are normal being raised in Korean culture. Like, was there any like clashes or conflicts where it was just hard to understand where the person was coming from?
I think I know it'd be way more interesting if there were tons.
Right.
But
Tons of fights.
Right. But Unu she's kind of not Korean in that way.
She's really straightforward. Girl.
Like this is kind of a stereotype, but a lot of Korean girls will text incessantly, or like will always ask, where are you, what's up, or and then the guys will either like, say this is too much,
or lie,
or lie, or
yeah.
like, I mean, it's just that kind of dynamic of like the girlfriend is always, buzzing your cell phone, but we never really had that issue, or but to think, I think we have a lot more of habitual differences.
Mm-hmm.
So in most cases, guys are more messy than girls, and especially getting married, you guys are living together. So those differences come apparent more and more. So it's like, okay, can you, clean the house? And I clean the house, and she's like, you didn't clean it. And I'm like, yes, I did. I spent an hour cleaning it. And she's like, you didn't do anything. Like, what do you mean? She's like, did you take a wet rag and clean the phone? I was like, no. Why would I do that? Yeah, so it's just standards are different.
Right.
Those kind of habits are different. But, I say this to a lot of my friends who are dating or, are interested about marriage and stuff, but it's really important, like how you fight.
Pick and choose your spots.
I mean, that, yes. You see a lot of old married couples who the guy will always say, just say yes, or just say sorry.
She's always right.
Right.
Yeah.
Like those are the common sayings, but I think more importantly, it's just like how you fight is really, really important. Like, are you screaming at the top of your lungs, saying things you're going to apologize for? Or are you just speaking your stance in a calm and, put together way while, being polite and thinking about the other person with respect? If you do that, then you're going to resolve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just can't control your anger and you're just, blurting everything out, there's going to be a problem.
Sure.
So,
of course. It's wise
Should
words.
be taking notes right now.
Yeah. Good thing you have this on record, Jay.
I mean, I got a question for Jay, actually.
Sure.
Yeah.
Ask away.
Coming from a Korean family, do your parents oppose like interracial marriage or
Right.
interracial relationships?
Right. I think definitely, my parents would prefer me to date or marry a Korean, just because my mom's English isn't fluent, and I think she would be much more comfortable being able to like bond with the daughter-in-law that's Korean and understands Korean culture and is able to converse with her in Korean. So, I mean, I think they do prefer me dating or marrying a Korean person. But
Have they ever explicitly said that?
I mean, like, if I push them on it, like, they will say it, but like, also like they try not to be pushy about it too. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's going to factor into any decisions that I make, but I'll think about it in the back of my mind. But they're also pretty westernized too. So, sorry,
Jay,
I'm coughing.
you're on a roll.
I shouldn't have asked him a question.
It's so stressful,
Sorry, we were going well.
Yeah, so yeah, I think they definitely do prefer me marrying a Korean person,
Yeah.
or like a Korean American that understands Korean culture for sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine, like, when I think about my own family and like a future spouse, I really think about like, okay, I hope he speaks Korean and English, because I consider both of my parents in that regard.
Right.
Because I know for like in my mom's case as well, she'd be far more comfortable with someone who can speak Korean and understand her and appreciate Korean food. That's really so important to her. For myself personally, I feel like it would almost be like, not even a disservice, like almost a slap in her face to be like, okay, here's somebody you can't relate to at all.
Right.
But I want to consider that when I consider my future guy.
Right.
Yeah. Was that something you thought about?
Well, I want to ask you first.
Okay. In the hot seat.
What if you had dated a foreigner but was willing to learn Korean? Do you think your mom would be like, okay, I can accept that? Like, let's see him learn Korean?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think so. That's the case of my sister's husband, like my brother-in-law, Hyungbo. Like he's white American. He never had stepped out of the country before he met my sister. And so when he met my mom, it was definitely a cultural shock for both.
Right.
But he's really made a huge effort to try to understand. And he calls her 엄마, which is really cute.
Oh, yeah, that is awesome.
And so she appreciates, I know she appreciates that. But like, I think it's the same thing with couples that don't speak each other's language. No matter how well you communicate and how well you try and how much effort you put into it, sometimes there can still be like a feeling of separation. You know, even people who speak English perfectly fluently, still, I know that they will say in their native tongue, there's things they can just express better.
Right.
And so it might not really be a wedge between your relationship, but regardless, it's still there. You know, it can still be there, not in all cases. And so I know, like, for my mom, I still think about that. That's really important, at least for me personally. But I know maybe some parents or some people are totally okay with having, you know, not a perfect understanding of each other's culture and language. Yeah, so it's something that I consider.
Yeah, I mean, my mom is ecstatic that she can, you know, communicate with Inu in Korean. And it's kind of funny when my sisters see me speaking Korean with my mom. They're just like, "Are you talking about me? You're talking about me, aren't you? Stop it!" And they feel really excluded. But one thing that I think I talked to you, Becky, about this before, but when you grow up with a parent who's an immigrant and English is their second language, you kind of view them with this kind of like ignorant mind that, oh, they're not smart.
Yeah.
They're not that
We had
smart.
talked about
And
Oh,
then,
yeah, that's so true.
and then you're like, wow, like I'm smarter than my mom. Like she should listen to me.
Oh my
And
God.
then
Wow,
you think that,
Yeah.
and then
yeah.
like I realized once I started speaking Korean, like she can say everything she wants to say perfectly in her own
Right.
language, but I just didn't understand it.
Yeah.
That is, it's crazy you bring that up because I went through the same thing actually. Like growing up, I was kind of always a little embarrassed at my mom's English. She speaks pretty well, but it's not native or fluent. And like whenever she would speak to my, you know, my English speaking friends, I'd be kind of slightly embarrassed,
Right,
you know,
right.
always in the back of my mind. I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And then I was always like, oh man, like when we get into arguments and stuff, I'd be like, she can't even say like, you know, what she wants to say. And you just grow up and, you know, you realize like when I came here, I just thought back to when I was a small, ignorant child, you know, ungrateful little brat or whatever. I was like, man, it's
Right.
really hard expressing yourself in a language that you're not comfortable with
Yeah.
or not
Yeah.
perfectly fluent in. And her English is a lot better than my Korean too. So
Yeah.
yeah, it really puts in perspective.
I can 100% relate to that so much. I do remember when I started speaking Korean more fluently and understanding, you know, especially like multi-layers of humor. My mom is so funny. Like
Right.
when I saw her interacting with my relatives in Korean over Chuseok break, she's so funny and she's so fast. And the thing is, you would never know. Like if
Right.
you only spoke to her in English, you would never know. And so you can only imagine just how frustrating it must be for her to try to
Dang.
communicate that
Yeah.
with me and my
Right.
sisters and my dad.
I had like
Yeah.
a really amazing experience a couple years ago. I grew up in New York with my cousins who immigrated to New York in elementary school. So their parents, my imo and imobu, they were working in New York. One as in a nail salon and one as a cook in a Korean restaurant. And they've been living in New York for now almost 15 years. But I never really had a full conversation with them because I couldn't speak Korean.
Right.
I mean, I was close with them. You know, they were my imo and imobu, but I never really had a full conversation with them until my imobu visited Korea like 2 years ago. And it was like meeting him for the first time.
Yeah.
It was incredible, like knowing someone your entire life and then suddenly being able to talk with them. It was amazing, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of touches upon what you were saying. Like when you speak a different language, even your personality changes too, you know? You can't really express who you are. So that's so cool that you like saw a completely new side to your
Oh
mom
my
when you
gosh,
went
it
back.
was such a surprise. Yeah. Because usually, like in family settings, you know, back in the States, like if it's just a nuclear family, of course, my mom's outspoken, you know, she does her thing. But like it's much harder when we have more and more people, right? And she'll be more like, she'll work in the kitchen or she'll help clean up or, you know, she'll like arrange things, but she's not really there in the spotlight or trying to entertain or discuss. But with our Korean family, and when I saw that for the first time, like, the room lights up and they think they're just laughing and asking her questions, and she's like some talk show host. She's so rapid fire, and you would never guess that. You'd never know. So it is beautiful to have learned Korean, and I think that's really cool that you have too.
And I was kind of curious, so now that your Korean's, really good, has your relationship with your mom changed or deepened? Or were you guys always like...
We were always close. Definitely, us four in the house, I was always the one who was like, I wouldn't say closest, but I would say like always listening to her problems and just, always there. But now that I can kind of understand, what she's actually saying, I think it definitely has brought her like a deeper joy. And yeah, like it was kind of funny actually when she came to meet Unu's parents for the first time. We went on a trip, like us three, me, Unu, and my mom. And even though she speaks Korean, it's like it's Korean from the 80s.
Right.
It's not Korean from now.
Yeah.
So we were on the train and we were like, 여기서 환승해야 돼. And I was like, you got to transfer here. And she's like, 환승? What's 환승? And I was like, transfer. It's like, we didn't have trains back then, so I never learned that word.
Dang.
And I was like, wow, okay. And then, it really becomes apparent, her Korean language when she's speaking Korean, because it's like, sometimes it's like Konglish. It's like, you'll say like,
I know that.
Totally
여기서 다치면 그 사람은 수해. It's like what? 수해? 고소하다. 고소해. It's like, okay.
It's so true though.
It's like,
so just like randomly like say these English words. So
that's totally it. Yeah.
You want to explain to people who might not have understand like what that was about?
Sure. I mean, okay.
I guess Sue.
Yeah. I mean, like just throwing in like an English word that my mom does that too. But like kind of like what you had just said, like, this gets hurt, then I'm going to sue this person. But it's this mixture of Korean and English. My mom did this when we went shopping. And she was trying to ask, like, I don't remember exactly what she said, but she kept using the English word. Yeah. And I kept looking at her. I was like, Mom, that's English. And the
do you even speak Korean, Mom?
Right? They asked her, they're like, 혹시 일본 분이세요? And she was like, yeah.
It must have shattered her.
She was really not happy with that. But still, like, I think, speaking English for so long and then mixing it with Korean culture, it can be really disorienting. Yeah.
Hold up, is there anything that you guys think we should
ask?
Touch upon some more, or?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm actually about to have a kid in June, so it's interesting to hear that you kind of, if you were to have a kid, you would probably leave Seoul. Is that right?
So wait, let me just say that for the record. Greg here, who's hanging out in the corner, he just said that he's about to have a kid. And your partner's Korean. Yep. She's Korean. And so Alex had said earlier that if he has kids, they'd probably leave Korea, or there's a possibility that you leave Korea. So Greg, you were asking, you felt that interesting, right?
Yeah, is that right? And
is that true?
Well, I think there are a couple different answers there. I wouldn't say that I would leave Korea or I would leave Seoul. I would say it would finally come into our minds. Is it time? Should we go? Is it a good environment to raise a child here? And I think the answer is yes in many different ways. Cost of life is very low. For us personally, we have a lot of friends here who are married, who are about to have kids, who do have kids. So we want to stay in this community. And although the education system is very mixed up, like I was saying before, it's also on the parents to really just give the kids a good environment to learn and just, not have them in school until 9-10 p.m., So I think Seoul can be a really good place, yeah.
So basically you're saying having a child would be the catalyst of really starting to think hard. Okay, are we going to stay here? Are we going to move on? Is life going to change drastically? What's it going to look like?
Yeah, but I think the simple answer is I would stay. I think our network is here. Everything is here. Career-wise is here. So I think we would stay, yeah.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see. Once kids come into the picture, I feel like just everything goes out the window and your whole life is shuffled around. So we'll
shambles,
we'll see.
some might say. No, I'm just kidding.
In shambles. Don't scare them.
No,
Don't scare the gentleman.
I'm kidding. Congratulations.
That sounds sounded almost sarcastic, Jay.
No, I wasn't being sarcastic.
We're serious, though.
Jealous.
So any other questions maybe on your side, Michael?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, like, I don't know if you said it already or touched upon it, but when you first met your wife and you guys started dating, since you were also connected to New York, was what I got from it, was there ever, like, a time when you guys dated where that kind of became, like, not necessarily an issue, but, like, since it's a future, maybe, like, obstacle that comes into play? Like, because you both belong to here and over there, and then she has to go over, or she...
Let me try to couch that question, just for the record again. So Michael, who's also hanging out in the corner. Hey, Michael. So he was asking...
Big Mike
in the house. When Alex and Unu first met, the fact that you were from New York City, overseas, and she's from Korea, was it something that you guys were maybe concerned about, the possibility? Like, it could be difficult to date because you're from two different countries?
Yeah.
Is that kind of the question?
It wasn't until I asked Unu, are you able to do what you do career-wise in another country? And she said, why? We're not going anywhere. You're not going anywhere. And I said, well, no, I don't have any plans to leave Korea, but I want the option to. I want the opportunity to, or I want, I just want the possibility to be there, in some, I want the possibility to be there just because in case there is, a family issue or a reason that we really need to leave, then we can still survive in another country. And she just kind of got worried and was like, wait, you're right, I need a skill. And then she quit her job. Nah, it wasn't that sudden, but she definitely was like, yeah, I need to get a skill.
She really took it seriously.
Yeah, she did.
I remember the change in her Instagram. I was like, what is she doing? What is with those cabinets? Yeah, I think that's pretty cool that you guys support each other like that. It's been fun seeing your relationship.
Yeah, you've seen pretty much all of it.
Yeah, because I met you kind of at the beginning of it.
Yeah, towards the beginning.
Yeah.
And Becky sang.
I did. I sang
Our
at
wedding.
your wedding.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I was so honored, honestly, by that. So it was really cool to see you guys. Yeah, that was a really lovely time. Such good memories. And so maybe one day in the future, we're going to have Alex and Unu's kids here interviewing on the Halfie Project.
Wow. Kids, huh? You're just throwing that out there like he's going to have them soon.
If you want screaming and in this podcast, then
I'm sure they're going to be handsome, intelligent, well-mannered children if they're your kids, right?
You're just like, nah.
Better go with Greg's kids.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for this conversation. Thanks for chiming in over here, Michael and Greg. It was really great to have you here in the studio as well. Jay, as always, good to have you.
Thank you.
And Alex, thank you so much for all your insight and your honesty.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, we hope that all of our listeners also enjoyed this as well. And we're going to be back with another podcast episode soon. So do be sure to follow us so you know when to tune in for that. And subscribe to the YouTube channel, The Halfie Project, to watch these interviews and videos. We also post the videos of our podcasts. So if you kind of like to see who we are behind the mic and what Alex actually looks like, then you can check it out on the channel. Don't be disappointed if you don't see Jay. He's a little camera shy. Oh, I wrote this earlier. But you're on the camera now, Jay, so everybody definitely watch that.
Yeah, they're going to see me just like, just holding back spasms, trying not to cough on the camera.
Yeah, get well soon, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, and well, we do look forward to getting listener mail at thehalfieproject@gmail.com. So Jay, thank you once again for being here and chatting it out and coughing a little bit. Alex, it's always a pleasure. And thank you for listening. We are The Halfie Project.
Dun, dun, dun.
Thanks for listening to The Halfie Project so far. We hope that you like what you're hearing and also hope that you'll be glad to discover that we have the Halfie Project YouTube channel as well, where you can watch interviews and videos with our guests. We have the website that's at thehalfieproject.com, and you can find more photos and stories there, as well as a community page where you can leave your own photos or experiences for others to see. There's also the Instagram. It's under the same name. And if you're looking to get in touch with us, you can email us at thehalfieproject@gmail.com.